Well, it's warmed up a little bit. It's late October, and it's just a little bit warmer today than it has been. But it's a beautiful morning. The water is so calm. You see that? It's very peaceful and still and quiet. But there's a big conflict that's broken out in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinians. And the Palestinians live on a stretch of land. It's called the West Bank, and it's sort of it's not a recognized nation, but it's a source of a lot of conflict, and it has been for, well, in some sense, thousands of years, but certainly since the formation of Israel as a country back in, I think it was 1948 after World War II. But the reason I just have been thinking about that is because before this conflict broke out, there's been a lot of tension because of the pandemic and the economic situation in the world, and the war in between Ukraine and Russia, and these types of things going on. But generally speaking, I was kind of thinking that the main reason for wars, I mean, there's lots of reasons for wars, but usually they come back to something that has to do with, if you go dig deep enough into the issue, it becomes some sort of scarcity issue between resources and that kind of stuff. There might be land disputes and boundary disputes like it's going on in Russia and the Ukraine, but really that's a deeper thing. It goes into all kinds of geopolitical type stuff. But ultimately, I've been really thinking that everybody's so worried right now about, which people tend to be always, every generation is concerned with some massive conflict. And of course, there has been in the lifetime of living people, one of the worst conflicts in human history, and that was World War II. And not too long before that was World War I, and there might be just a couple of people living on this planet that, I don't know if they could remember World War I, but they were alive during World War I. And there might be somebody they might have been like 5 years old. They might have been able to remember World War I. If they were 5, they could still be alive. They'd be like 105 now, or 110 or something like that. So maybe like one person in the world. but certainly it's in the memory of people who are alive today whose parents were in World War I and World War II. And you're only one. Grandpa Bill didn't fight in World War II, but he was born during at the very beginning of World War II for America. And so these things have happened. But I was thinking that the calendar intuitively, a lot of the technologies and things that people are concerned with are actually really more, it's the uncertainty that people are worried about. But if you really look at what's happening, the technology that's coming along today should relieve a lot of the stress around economic resources that people are actually concerned about. And we should be really moving more time towards a time of great peace, in my opinion. Although we may have to go through some conflict before we get there. And that's the scary thing a little bit. I'm not a big believer in sort of using the Bible or other ancient texts as necessarily as like fortune telling, as much as people thought about issues. They knew what war and conflict was all about. They fought all the time back in the old days, and particularly because resources were more scarce. or harder to get, harder to obtain. So it caused a lot of conflict. And so they were very aware of the ups and downs of peace and war and cycles. The Roman Empire, they were constantly, either for their own doing by expanding their borders or because they were defending themselves, but they were constantly fighting. They had a constant military force protecting Rome, outside of Rome. And man, there's something in the air. Oh. And but anyhow, I do think that we're moving towards a great time of peace. However, the Bible has mentioned some things that are odd about what am I thinking before this conflict with Israel broke out. The Bible kind of talks about a time of great war before there's peace. And I think, maybe you can argue with people who want to interpret that as Armageddon or something like that. That's their own way of looking at it. I don't think Armageddon could be every generation could experience an Armageddon. I think World War II could, if you lived and fought and were exposed to World War II, you probably would consider that Armageddon. I'm not here to talk about that issue as a big religious matter as much as I think people who wrote the great text and whatnot just understood how bad wars and things could be. So let's, obviously pray that this conflict that has started in the Middle East is not going to escalate into something much worse. But it does bring up the point of being aware of how the different religions, both offer a place of peace and comfort for their followers, but they also can be a source of conflict between the different religions. And why that is, it has to be, I don't know, but that was what Christ and Christianity was trying to solve, trying to say that we're all part of God's family. That was really the biggest message, and Christ was around during a time of great conflict, driven by the Roman Empire and its influences in the Middle East. So this didn't come out of nowhere. And in fact, the Old Testament, which in Christianity is the Old Testament, is based on the Hebrew religious text. And an interesting point about that was that text wasn't actually even finalized by the Jewish religion until after Christ. So it was after Christ, even though it's a very old text, it goes back thousands of years, the beginnings of it, it wasn't, the text as it is today wasn't finalized until after Christ was crucified. And so we're all kind of following a similar text at one level, and then at the other level we're kind of conflicting with one another. So not to make a point about Christianity as being better than anybody else's religion, but just to make the point that Christianity the point of it was really to try and stop what is happening right now. That was kind of the big message from Christ, is that we're all God's children, we're all brothers and sisters, and we don't have to fight with one another. We would be better to have peace with one another. It would be more productive. The world would be better. It would be further ahead and further along, and we'd be more advanced if we did those things. But overall, although during war, economists and people will make the argument that wars also produce things, which is true, but it's not the way that you want to produce things. You'd rather for things to produce along a nice, steady, peaceful slope than in these shocks where lots of people die and lots of people are injured. Ultimately, it causes people to have to rely, or it just gives people who are power hungry more opportunity to grasp more power, and it's not good in the big sense of things. And but it's just an important message to they're not for a young person to have to spend too much time on, but as you grow, you want to have it in your mind before everybody else tells you what you're supposed to believe, to understand that you can study these different aspects of culture and history for yourself and try to have a good, solid understanding of it as in a logical way rather than in a heavily emotional way. Emotion is a part of it all, but there's so many people who are driven by religion in this almost purely emotional sense, and it's not good, because that's also how people get motivated to fight with one another and etc. And and I think the world is more apt for peace than for war, but that doesn't mean that's going to be the way that it is. Anyhow, enjoy every day on this earth and try to be a person who's the level-headed and looking for the peaceful solutions. I love you.